Questions that come up a lot on my channel when it comes to things like healing from narcissistic abuse, having been in difficult, toxic relationships, family environments, cult-like dynamics, and so on. What does it take to heal from narcissistic abuse? What does it look like? How do you know? Do you ever get back to being the person you were, the way things were before we had to go through what we were going through? And the last question is, how long does it take? What does it take? What is it you need to do? If you've been psychologically, emotionally manipulated, abused, taken for granted, ignored, all of the different things that go on in narcissistic relationships, you've had your whole sense of reality rewritten for you. It's like they're trying to reprogram you. Well, the first thing is to make sense of what happened. It's when people go on to channels like mine, they're watching videos about the different motivations, the different characteristics, the traits and the reasons behind narcissistic behaviors. What is it drives them and so on. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It is good to educate yourself to maybe get a better understanding of the kind of person that you might have been involved with. But also making sense of some of our own reactions as well. The things that we did to try to make things better, to try to maybe reason with them, to try to reach them, to try to be heard, to try to be understood. The number of times we might have given chances, just chance after chance, in the hope that this time things were going to change. So it's not always just about looking at the narcissistic person. And this is where therapy can come in helpful. It's looking at some of our own motivations. Quite commonly in narcissistic relationships, I'd say any kind of environment where there are narcissistic people, we fall for a version of someone. And we both engage in this fantasy about how everything is going to be wonderful. But what tends to happen is there are these little minor rejections, these little minor pulling away, abandonments, things like that. Little things like that happen over a period of time, and we don't always notice them at first. Another common question comes up is, why didn't I see the warning signs? Why didn't I see the red flags? Because a lot of the times they were subtle and they were kind of normalized. They were made it look as if they weren't actually doing anything wrong, that maybe you were the problem. You had done or said something wrong. So it's understanding and making sense of the nature of the dynamic that was going on, not just what motivates them, but the stuff that was going on with us as well. It also takes, and I always like to quote Jay Reid on this, learning to live in defiance of their narrative. You couldn't do something because you were too stupid. You couldn't make decisions for yourself because you'll always make the wrong choice. You shouldn't try new things. So it can take living in defiance. It's starting to do little things for yourself. But the whole time it's recognizing that it can be difficult. What it takes is, I believe, intent. When we feel pain, we often want the pain to go away. Some people play video games, some people will drink, some people will eat cake, some people will go to the gym. There's lots of different things people do. I wouldn't say there's anything inherently wrong with what we do, as long as it isn't too unhealthy. But the thing is, it's like anything, whenever we're trying to avoid pain, the very things we do can often be the very things that make it worse. Either that or it keeps it going. And when we want that quick, easy route, sometimes it's accepting that there are no magic words that can undo the pain that was caused. There's no combination of words can undo what happened that can suddenly make that narcissistic person realize, damn, it was me all along, and maybe I better go and apologize. If you will, it's learning to manage our expectations on ourselves and on them as well. If they would not change, if they would not listen, if they would not hear your pleas the whole way through that relationship, why do you think they're going to listen? Why do you think they're suddenly going to change now that you're apart? They're doing the same thing. They're probably just doing it with someone else. So it's recognizing that they're not going to change. It's also recognizing that our healing is not going to happen immediately. It's not going to be a quick fix. So I often say it's a journey. It's not a sprint to a finish line. It's also recognizing that a lot of the time we had been psychologically conditioned to respond and to react to certain stimuli. Every time we got a sour look, every time somebody would withdraw, give us a silent treatment, we would be wondering, what can I do to fix this? What can I, so we have to recognize there are little things still going on with us. So it's learning to recognize those triggers, because sometimes even after the situation, someone could do something, could say something, and we could feel as if we're right back in that situation. It's learning to recognize those triggers and finding ways to disarm them. Something else that could be very useful is to try to either minimize the contact or at least create some kind of distance, whether that's physical distance, that could be no contact, it could be emotional distance, psychological distance. But really what you're trying to do is you're trying to minimize and control any contact that you need to have. Because the thing is, it's very difficult to heal in an environment that's been hurting you. Sometimes the most we can ever do is learn to manage ourselves, okay? But we're not necessarily going to heal if that situation, that environment is ongoing. So it's maybe trying to create some kind of distance. And if it's not physical distance, emotional, psychological distance. The other thing we need are other people. Therapy is a good place to start. There's someone who's going to get it, someone who's going to listen to you, someone who's going to validate you, someone who's going to work collaboratively with you to try to find a way through and a way forward. Also mixing with other people who get it, who understand you, not necessarily other people who have been in narcissistic relationships, but people who care about you, people who like you, people who want to see the best in you, bring out the best in you, people you feel safe and comfortable with. I've said it so many times, the antidote to toxic people are decent people. Sometimes we have to acknowledge, when I mentioned earlier on about how I just want to go back to the way I was. I want to go back to the way things were. Sometimes we have to recognize maybe we'll have to let parts of us go, certain parts of us. The parts of us that may be invested in that fantasy. Parts of us that are still maybe holding on to the hope that sooner or later they might just notice us, they might just recognize us, they might just apologize, things like that. Letting go of something can be one of the most difficult things we'll ever do. That's why I say things like therapy and supportive people can really help. It can be one of the most difficult things we'll ever do, but it can also be one of the most liberating. And when we let maybe those parts of us go, it's not that we're actually losing anything. I would suggest that the other parts of us start to become a bit stronger. They start to become more galvanized, more consolidated. So we don't actually become smaller as such. What we're losing sometimes, it's like a ball and chain. We're losing the ball and chain, the thing that has been holding us back, keeping us maybe enmeshed in whatever fantasy that they had created. Something else, and this is something you would look at in therapy, we cannot change what happened. What we do with trauma is, and there are different ways, there's many different approaches, we learn to integrate what happened into our experience. Doesn't mean it didn't hurt. Doesn't mean it wasn't fair. Doesn't mean any of those things. But when we do that, it can be the difference between things like rumination, getting flashbacks and so on. If we're going to think about it, it's because we're choosing to. And we're doing it from a sense of control, if you will. It's been a very deeply unpleasant experience, but it's not dictating our lives. I like to think of it as it's the difference between voluntary and involuntary recall. And that's something that you'll be working with a therapist to try to integrate into your experience the things that happen, being able to make sense of things that don't make sense, that are way out of our frame of reference, way out of our experience. Our normal ways of coping and dealing with the world did not work. But whatever it is you do, when it comes to moving forward, when it comes to healing, there has to be intent. We have to do something with intention. It's what is the aim? What is the goal here? It is to move forward. It is to have a better life. It is to find happiness, to find love, to find success, whatever it is. You want to get fit, you want to get healthy, you go to the gym with intent, okay? You don't just turn up and expect the machines to do things and you start building muscle or losing weight or whatever. There has to be intent. There has to be effort. And sometimes that effort might be difficult, it might be painful, but again, with the right kind of people around you, it can be easier. Don't necessarily have to face these things alone. But moving on to, what would recovery look like? Recovery is going to look different for different people, okay? I would say that recovery when you've maybe let go of that ball and chain, the parts of you that have been holding you back, when you start to understand the nature of the relationship, maybe you start recognizing they were just selling you snake oil, and they were selling that same snake oil to pretty much anyone who would listen. That's just who they are. That's what they do. When we realize that, maybe we stop trying to figure them out. We stop worrying about them rejecting us. We don't fear them anymore. We don't fear their silent treatment. We don't think of them maybe 100 miles away, thinking that they might be thinking about us. For some people, recovery kind of looks like that person is a memory, no more than that. An unpleasant memory, an uncomfortable memory, but that's all they are. Like when I said earlier on about when we integrate into our experience the awful things that have happened to us, they are still memories. The memories don't go away, but we might be looking at them differently. So that person might pop into your head once in a while. You might even remember the way they behaved, the things they said. You might even remember how you behaved to try to maybe reason with them, whatever. But again, you recognize them as just selling snake oil. They are incapable of anything other than maybe a surface level discussion. So when that happens, they're not really taking up space in your head anymore. They're not taking up space in your life. You're not wondering about them. You're not having a look on social media to see what they're doing, where they are. You might be curious, don't get me wrong. Nothing wrong with that. Lots of people are curious about their ex-partners, wondering what they look now and what they're up to, things like that. That's perfectly normal. I like it whenever we get to the point. Some people think that indifference is a good strategy to use in their recovery, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I like to think of indifference as being an outcome of recovery. It gets to the point where you really just don't care. Now, you don't necessarily want anything bad to happen to them. You might even still hope that they get the help that you think they need. So you don't necessarily want anything bad to happen to them, but you don't really care if anything good happens to them either. You're just indifferent. Someone might even tell you they bumped into them the other day, and you might have a mild curiosity, but other than that, you probably don't care. What you're not going to do is you're not going to be asking for information. What are they doing? What did they say? But then you're not going to say, I don't care. Whatever it is. You're just indifferent. Like I say, you don't hear them anymore. You don't hold on to their shame anymore. In that relationship, where you get the term scapegoat, you get blamed on everything. You're asked to carry all their shame for them. Everything that goes wrong, you're responsible for all their misery. You're not their scapegoat anymore. Even when you hear their name or you see a picture of them, sometimes we get that, even a physical reaction. It feels as if we're right back there. We don't feel that anymore because you're not their scapegoat. They are nothing. They're off selling snake oil to someone else. What you also recognize is your recovery did not depend on them. You didn't need their permission to move forward in life. You didn't need, as much as you would have liked it, you didn't need their apology. You didn't need their acknowledgement. You would have liked it, but you accept that it's not coming because, again, they did not, in their minds, they did nothing wrong. It was all you. You have no interest in getting even either. As much as it can hurt, we want some kind of revenge, some kind of justice. You have no interest in getting even. Not anymore. In the early days, something like a revenge fantasy. A revenge fantasy can be very corrosive. It's like an expression I heard once. It's like drinking poison and hoping that they get sick. So that's the toxic side of it. That's where it can actually hold us back. It's not so useful. What you can do, even with that, and you start to find a bit of momentum, you recognize that your idea of some kind of revenge or some kind of justice or trying to show them that you're not stupid and you are capable of whatever, you start to recognize what you really want is for them to desperately notice you. You just want them to see you. The whole time in that relationship, you want them to see you for who you really are. You wanted them to see your love. You wanted them to see your pain. You wanted them to see all these different things. They either couldn't or they didn't care. Doesn't matter what you do. They're not going to notice you unless it's something that impacts them personally. And if you're apart, chances are they've moved on, they've got a new supply. So when you recognize that need you had for them to notice you, That could be something that you've let go. That could have been that ball and chain that you were wearing. You don't need them to see you because they're not. And again, going back to the indifference, they're not that important. It doesn't matter whether they see you or not. You decide for yourself that you want a better life. You decide for yourself that you're going to succeed at something. You're going to at least give something a try. That could be learning a new skill, enrolling in a class, going for a promotion, maybe starting your own business. It could be, it doesn't matter what it is. Writing a book, starting a YouTube channel, doesn't matter what it is. You're doing it for you. And you can measure your own success. You don't need them to tell you whether or not you've done a good job at it. Remember what I said, if they didn't care about you and they didn't see you in the relationship, why do you think they're going to see you now that you're gone? Now, moving on to the last question, how long does recovery take? Well, how long is a piece of string? It really depends on the person, the personal experiences, the nature of the abuse, how long did it last? Was it maybe in the family of origin? Was it in a workplace? Was it in some cult-like movement? Was it in a marriage or something? It can depend on a lot of different things. Each and every person is unique. I think it also depends on their support network. Again, decent people, good people, having a good therapist. And I think it takes as long as it has to. There is no shortcut to recovery. We let it take as long as it has to, and we don't necessarily measure it the way we would measure other things, because sometimes it's not a linear journey. Sometimes we have to take a step back in order to be able to move forward, or a step to the side to be able to move forward. Sometimes we even have to change direction. So recognize it's a journey, it's not a race. And looking at some of the points I raised earlier, sometimes we get to the point where the past is informing us. It's not making decisions for us. It's not dictating what we do next. When we've done a bit of work on ourselves, when we have addressed our trauma, when we've found a better understanding with ourselves, a relationship with ourselves as much as with the world around us and so on, the next time we're triggered, we might not leap straight into survival mode. That trigger has only reminded us that this looks familiar. We've become a bit better at managing our boundaries. Maybe by then, I like to say what we do is we give people their own work to do, okay? We don't start defending ourselves. We can give an account, of course. We can give an explanation if we need to. But what we don't do is we don't try to reason with someone who has set out to be unreasonable. No, what we don't do is we don't start explaining why our boundaries are important. We ask them to explain why they think they're not. That can be a good sign of recovery. We're not going back to that place. We're not going to be treated the same way because we have learned. We're not being aggressive. We're not even being passive aggressive. We're being assertive. And this is the thing. If we're not paying attention, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, but one day you might hear something or you might see something that reminds you of that situation you're in, or even that person, and it just might cross your mind that you hadn't thought about them in a long time. And you hadn't even noticed because you were more focused on your current life. You were more focused on the future life that you were interested in. You're more focused on the people around you that you care about and that care about you. And you just realize you hadn't thought about them. It might have, even if it was only for a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month, you hadn't been keeping track. And I think that's a good sign. It's not that we ever forget. Going back to what I was saying earlier, when they do pop into our head, we acknowledge it. It is what it is. It's a memory. We can let it go. We don't push it away. We don't try and avoid it. We can just let it go and go back to focusing on what we're doing. And if we do think about it, it's because we're choosing to. We're not getting flashbacks. We're not having nightmares. We're not ruminating excessively, replaying different situations over and over again. What if I'd said this? What if I'd done that? No, they just pop into your head and then they go as quickly as they came. And I think when you get to that point, whether that's a month, a year, 5 years, there's no time limit. Everybody's different. What you do is you realize you're living for you and you're living for the people that you love. You're not living hoping that some snake oil person is suddenly going to recognize reality